Louis XIV's illegitimate children. Louis XIV, King of France from 1638 to 1715, was, like all French kings, expected to have many lovers to prove his virility. And, as could be expected in a time before reliable birth control, he also had a large crop of illegitimate children. Last week, we met 13 of Louis's mistresses. Today, we'll meet the 16 resulting offspring. They were granted grand titles and estates and married to high-ranking royals, but they often faced prejudice from haughty courtiers for being born on the wrong side of the sheets. Louis XIV inherited the throne when he was just 5. At 22, his mother arranged a marriage to his double first cousin, Maria Theresa, daughter of King Philip IV of Spain. The union ended a long war between the great nations, and it was hoped that she would bear the king a brood of children to fill the line of succession. But selecting such a close relation as the king's mate did not work out well. Maria Theresa was a member of the Habsburg family, who were notorious for incest and the host of health problems and high infant mortality that came along with it. Her younger half-brother, King Charles II of Spain, was the most tragically inbred monarch in Europe. King Louis was unimpressed with his bride upon their first meeting. Still, he remained faithful to her for the first year of their marriage. She gave birth to a healthy son, Louis Grand Dauphin, but in the years that followed, the queen had 5 more children, who all died tragically young. Anne Elizabeth and Marie Anne were lost in infancy. Marie Therese died from tuberculosis at 5. Philippe Charles from a chest infection at 2, and Louise Francoise in infancy. While the queen suffered the tragic deaths of her children, she also had to endure her husband ignoring her in favor of his many mistresses. Maria Theresa couldn't bear to see the madames pregnant at court, but she doted on their children, 8 of whom the king legitimized and awarded grand titles. Charles de la Baume du Blanc was the first of King Louis's illegitimate children, born to his first serious mistress, Louise de la Valiere. As the king's devout mother disapproved of adultery, he tried to keep his love affairs discreet until after her death. When Louise began to show, she was whisked away from court. She gave birth on December 19th in secret, and the baby was taken away to be raised by trusted servants. Louise returned to court, but news of the birth got out. At a Christmas Eve midnight mass, she was scorned by the court and so humiliated that she ran from the church. Louise was soon pregnant again and gave birth to 2 more sons, Philippe in January of 1665 and Louis in December of the same year. Tragically, all 3 babies died within a year of each other, of unknown illnesses. Louise and Louis didn't see their children often, but still they mourned their deaths. Louise's 4th child, Marie Anne de Bourbon, survived childhood. When she was 1, her father recognized and legitimized her. She was able to use the king's surname of Bourbon, but she was not added to the line of succession. At this time, her mother was pregnant with her 5th child, but the king had grown tired of her. He ignored her in favor of his new mistress, Madame de Montespan. After 3 years, Louise grew tired of the neglect and left court to become a nun. She left her 2 children behind as well. They were added to the household of their father's brother, the Duc d'Orléans, and raised with his children. The king was exceedingly fond of his eldest surviving daughter. Even Queen Maria Theresa doted on Marie Anne. She was also close to her legitimate half-brother, Louis Grand Dauphin. The siblings visited each other often throughout their lives. When Marie was 13, her father arranged a grand marriage for her to his own distant cousin, 18-year-old Louis Armand I de Bourbon, Prince of Conti, as Louis Armand was a prince of the blood and a legitimate descendant of King Louis IX. While Marie Anne was illegitimate, the union caused scandal. It would not be the first, as King Louis married many of his illegitimate children to his royal relatives. The prince fell in love with his bride at first sight, but their wedding night was a disaster. For 5 years, they remained childless, and Marie Anne shocked the court by openly stating that her husband was terrible at sex. Marie Anne and Louis Armand both contracted smallpox. She recovered, but he died at the age of 24. With her marital responsibilities over, the Dowager Princess threw herself into the social life at court. At 32, she received a marriage proposal from her 15-year-old nephew, Philippe, Duke of Anjou, a younger son of her own half-brother, Louis Grand Dauphin, but the union would have been inappropriate. Philippe would later become King Philippe V of Spain. Marie Anne also rejected a proposal from the Sultan of Morocco, as she preferred the freedom of widowhood. She did have an affair with an impoverished knight, but her father learned that he was taking advantage of her and banished him. Marie Anne ranked high in the rigid pecking order of her father's court. But when her younger sisters both married men of even higher rank, the siblings became enemies. When Marie Anne was 44, her mother died, leaving her a substantial fortune and her title of Duchess of La Valiere and of Fougeaux. She bought herself an hôtel in Paris and the Château du Choisy. Marie Anne was 49 when her father died. As both his eldest son and eldest grandson had predeceased him, he left the throne to his great-grandson, 5-year-old King Louis XV. He was betrothed to 3-year-old Infanta Mariana Victoria of Spain, who was brought to France to be raised until she was old enough to marry. Marie Anne was appointed to oversee the princess's education. The engagement was called off 4 years later. Mariana Victoria returned to Spain and later became Queen of Portugal. Marie Anne retired to the countryside and lived in luxury until the age of 72, when she died of a brain tumor. King Louis lavished his illegitimate children with gifts. But while noble titles and millions of livres are nice, what they really wanted was some History Tea Time merch. I'm dropping 2 new designs today. This one honors the 8 queens regnant of England: Matilda, who fought a civil war for the crown; Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen; Bloody Mary I; Glorious Elizabeth I; Mary II, half of Britain's only co-monarchy; her sister Anne; Victoria, and of course Elizabeth II, whose 70-year reign came to an end this year. Under each queen are the dates of her birth, reign, and death. My other new design honors the 6 wives of Henry VIII, incorporating the famous rhyme about their terrible fates. If England isn't your thing, I have 4 other designs which include queens from around the world. I hope you will find something perfect for yourself or as a fun holiday gift for the history lover in your life. You can order any of these designs printed on t-shirts, hoodies, tote bags, teacups, stickers, and more. Click on the link in the description to get History Tea Time merch today and help support the channel. Use promo code HISTORY10 before December 10th to get 10% off. And now, back to history. Louis, Count of Vermandois, was legitimized at 2, created a count, and appointed Admiral of France, though he wasn't really expected to command the Royal Navy before he could talk. He was raised in the household of the king's younger brother, Philippe I, Duke of Orleans, who was famously effeminate and bisexual. One of his many lovers, Philippe de Lorraine, was handsome, but described as insinuating, brutal, and devoid of scruples. The teenage count became involved with Lorraine's circle of friends, who secretly called themselves the Holy Congregation of Glorious Pederasts. They had sex with teenage boys. When the king learned of his son's involvement, he banished Lorraine and reprimanded his son. He wanted to marry him off as soon as possible to cover up the scandal. Hoping to mend the relationship between father and son, the Duchess of Orleans suggested the younger Louis be sent as a soldier to fight in Flanders. While there, Louis fell ill, and his doctor advised him to return home to recover. But he was desperate to win back his father's approval, and he remained on the battlefield. He died there a month shy of his 17th birthday. His aunt and his sister greatly mourned his death, while his father reportedly did not shed a tear. His mother was still obsessed with the sins of her youth and remarked, "I ought to weep for his birth far more than for his death." Louis was buried in Arras Cathedral, though it was suggested that he may not have died, but may have been the mysterious man in the iron mask. King Louis's second significant mistress, Françoise Athénaïs, Marquise de Montespan, was already a mother of two when their affair began. Her first child by the king, Louise Francoise de Bourbon, died at the age of 2. Louis Auguste, Duke of Maine, was named after Augustus, ancient Rome's first emperor. At his birth, he was placed in the care of his mother's friend, Françoise d'Aubigné. She raised all of Madame de Montespan's children with the king in a house near the Luxembourg Palace in Paris. They rarely saw their mother, who lived in the palace with the king. Louis Auguste was particularly close to his governess and considered her his real mother. Because of a birth injury, one of his legs was shorter than the other. Françoise took him to doctors in Belgium and a spa in the Pyrenees Mountains in search of a cure. When he was 3, his father legitimized he and his siblings. The next year, he introduced them at court and made Louis Auguste a colonel-general in the Swiss Guard. He was his father's favorite child, and the king lavished him with titles and honors. He was made sovereign prince of the Doms. He had the best tutors, including a famous military strategist, though he remained a mediocre student and soldier. His father wanted the best bride for him as well. The king considered the daughter of his own brother, but her mother was horrified at the thought of her child marrying a bastard. However, the Prince of Condé, a more distant relative but still a prince of the blood, was willing to overlook the discrepancy in social status. Louis Auguste was given a choice between the Duke's 3 daughters. All 3 were very short. He selected the middle daughter, Louise Benedicte, because she was an inch taller than the others. Her elder sister was deeply offended. At their wedding, the guest of honor was King James II, who had recently been kicked off the throne of England. Louis Auguste's mother, Madame de Montespan, who had been banished from court during the affair of the poisons, was not invited. Louise Benedicte walked with a limp just like her husband. Many at court snickered cruelly at the couple. Their marriage was not happy. She was ashamed at having been forced to wed an illegitimate son, and was often unfaithful. They had 3 children, which are assumed to have been his. When his mother died, he inherited the bulk of her estate, but he mourned her very little, as he had barely known her. He was always much closer to his former governess, Madame de Maintenon, who, after the death of Queen Maria Theresa, became the king's secret wife. In 1711, King Louis's only surviving legitimate son, Louis Grand Dauphin, died of smallpox at 49. A year later, his eldest son, Louis, Duke of Burgundy, died of measles at 29. His brother, Philippe, had recently denounced his claim to the throne of France in order to take the throne of Spain, and women and their descendants were barred from the succession entirely. This meant there were only 2 people in line to the throne: King Louis XIV's infant great-grandson, Louis, and his grandson, Charles, Duc de Berry, having just fought a war with Spain because their dynasty had died out. The king knew he needed to ensure the future of his own throne. Thus he made 2 of his illegitimate sons, Louis Auguste and his younger brother, Louis Alexandre, princes of the blood, and added them to the succession. As the king's health deteriorated, he sent these sons to evince in his place. In his will, King Louis named both his legitimate nephew, the Duc d'Orléans, and Louis Auguste as regents for his 5-year-old great-grandson, now King Louis XV. But Orléans had the will annulled by Parliament and took the regency all for himself. Urged by his ambitious wife, Louis Auguste joined the Célimare conspiracy against the regent. The plot was foiled, and Louis Auguste was sent to prison for 5 years. His wife was ashamed at having instigated his downfall. When he was released, they retired to their estates and lived a peaceful life together. She tried to find spouses for their 3 children, but the haughty members of the court refused their proposals, and all 3 remained unmarried. Louis Auguste died at 66. Louis César, Count of Vexin, was named after Julius Caesar. As was common for second sons, César was destined for the church and was granted the title Abbot of Saint-Denis when he was 2 years old. He was born with a crooked spine. One of his shoulders was higher than the other, and he walked with a limp. Doctors tried a number of painful experimental treatments on him, but rather than improve his condition, they left him bedridden for days. César died at the age of 10 and was buried at the Abbey of Saint-Germain-des-Prés. His mother and father were both distraught. Louise Francoise de Bourbon was born in Tournai when her parents were on a military tour. She was very close to her younger sister, Louise Marie Anne, who was given the title Madame de Tours and nicknamed Tutu. Louise Francoise was heartbroken when Tutu died at the age of 6. Her mother was saddened, but was far too busy to attend the funeral. Louise Francoise never bonded with her youngest sister, Françoise Marie. She was a talented dancer and inherited her mother's caustic wit, which made her adored by some and disdained by others. She was called the prettiest, wittiest, and naughtiest of the fast set at court, and was in constant hot water. Her comic verse, often indecent, was genuinely amusing, except to the victims, and the king was not at all amused at a set which she had written on his Auguste self. At 11, Louise was wed to 16-year-old Louis Duc de Bourbon, her father's cousin, and given a dowry of 1 million livres. At 12, Louise came down with smallpox. Her husband stayed away, but his mother and grandfather, the Prince du Condé, nursed her back to health. Unfortunately, the grandfather died of the disease. After Louis Francois' mother was banished from court, she went to visit her at the convent where she had retired, and the pair grew close. She was greatly affected by her mother's death, but her father forbade her to wear black at court. She gave birth to 9 children, all of whom survived to adulthood. It is likely that her 4th daughter, Marie Anne, was the result of a love affair with the Prince of Conti. When her husband learned of the infidelity, he was furious and began to sink into madness. His father died and he became the Prince of Condé. But he died a year later. The Dowager Princess had a portrait painted of herself in widow's garb, but many suspected that her grief was not sincere. She frequently attended the court of her legitimate half-brother, Louis Grand Dauphin, in the hopes of ingratiating herself to the future king. But when he died unexpectedly, she was rejected by the new Dauphine, Marie Adelaide, who looked down on women of lower rank. All that became moot within a year when the Dauphin and Dauphine both died of measles. Louise had a long-term affair with the Marquis du Lassay. He built the Hôtel du Lassay next to her Palace Bourbon and constructed an art gallery connecting the two homes so the lovers could meet. King Louis XV asked Louise Francoise to be godmother to his first son. She died at 70. Françoise Marie de Bourbon inherited her mother's beauty and was a proud girl. It was said that she remembered she was the daughter of the king, even when on the toilet. Her former governess, Madame de Maintenon, cared deeply for her charges and encouraged the king to grant them important titles and grand marriages. For Françoise Marie, she secured the highest match of all, to the king's only legitimate nephew, Philippe d'Orléans. The court was scandalized by the match between a prince of the blood and an illegitimate daughter. Philippe's mother slapped him when she learned of the betrothal. She treated her daughter-in-law with disdain and ignored her grandchildren. She complained that Françoise Marie believes she has done my son honor by marrying him, and she will not see any difference between legitimate and illegitimate. The couple wed when she was 15 and he 22. The ceremony took place in the royal chapel at the Palace of Versailles. A banquet was held in the Hall of Mirrors. Françoise Marie was now addressed as Royal Highness. The newlyweds traveled and lodged with the king, dined with him, and were entitled to armchairs in his presence. Her new position put her above both of her older sisters, 26-year-old Marie Anne and 19-year-old Louise Francoise. The elder sisters were also deeply hurt that their father gave Françoise Marie a dowry of 2 million livres, twice what they had received. Françoise Marie flaunted her position above her sisters, and all three were openly hostile to each other. She also didn't get along with her husband. He womanized and nicknamed her Madame Lucifer. She got drunk 3 to 4 nights a week. Despite the discord, the union produced 8 children. They became Duke and Duchess d'Orléans in 1701, and they spent lavishly to redecorate their palaces. She managed to secure the marriage of one of her daughters, Marie-Louise, to Charles, Duc de Berry, the youngest son of her legitimate half-brother, Louis Grand Dauphin, and another daughter, Louise Elizabeth, to Louis' grandson, King Louis I of Spain, further elevating her family. When her father died, both her husband and her brother, the Duke of Maine, were named as regents to 5-year-old King Louis XV. The brothers-in-law quarreled over power. Orléans won and Maine was imprisoned. As the wife of the regent, Françoise Marie was the most important woman in France. Her husband granted her a massive allowance, and she purchased and renovated the Château du Bagnolet. He died in 1723, and she enjoyed widowhood for 26 years. When Louis XV wed Polish princess Marie Leszczyńska, Françoise Marie's place at court was eclipsed. But rather than make an enemy of the new queen, she befriended her, helped her to learn the complicated etiquette of the court, and threw parties in her honor. Françoise Marie died in 1749, age 71. She was the last surviving child of Louis XIV. Her descendants include the last kings of Italy and Portugal, and the current kings of Belgium and Spain. Louis Alexandre, Count of Toulouse, was named after Alexander the Great. He was legitimized at 3 and made a count and grand admiral. During the War of Spanish Succession, 15-year-old Louis Alexandre was given the task of defending Sicily. At 18, he was named Marshal of France, and at 26, he commanded the French fleet at the Battle of Vélez-Malaga. He preferred to avoid the drama of court and getting pulled in to his siblings' intrigues. His father added both he and his elder brother Louis Auguste to the succession. But while his brother was kicked out of power during the regency of Louis XV, Louis Alexandre held a position on the Regency Council. He remained single until the age of 45, when he fell in love with Marie Victoire de Noailles, the 35-year-old widow of his maternal half-brother. The couple wed in secret and had one son together. Louis Alexandre died at 59. Armand Gaston Maximilien de Rohan, Cardinal of Strasbourg, was born shortly after his mother Anne de Rohan-Champeaux had a brief affair with the king. He was the seventh of her 11 children. Her husband, the Prince of Soubise, claimed Armand as his own, but it was noted how much he resembled the king. Armand rose high in both the church and in politics, far beyond his siblings who did not enjoy a special royal patronage. He became Cardinal of Strasbourg, and his possible father, King Louis, named him to the Regency Council during the minority of Louis XV. Armand constructed the Hôtel du Rohan and lived there until the age of 75. Louise de Maisonblanche was the daughter of Claude de Vendée. Claude was a lady-in-waiting to the king's official mistress, Madame de Montespan. Madame asked Claude to sleep with the king to keep other rivals out of his bed. Claude had many lovers, and when she gave birth to her only child, Louise, and claimed it was the king's, he was dubious. The baby was officially recorded as the daughter of a cavalry captain named Maisonblanche. Louise grew up to greatly resemble the king, but he continued to deny his paternity and treated her and her mother coldly. Claude was furious. She was implicated in the affair of the poisons and may have planned to murder the king in revenge for refusing to legitimize Louise, as he had done his children by his 2 official mistresses. Claude was banished from court. She raised her daughter in Paris, but died when Louise was only 11. She was taken in by her mother's friends. At 20, she married Bernard de Pré, Baron de la Cour, a lieutenant in the army. The king sent his valet to oversee the wedding and grant a dowry of 40,000 livres, a fraction of the millions her half-sisters had received when they wed princes. Her husband's position would have allowed Louise to attend her father's court, but she never wanted to go. The couple had 11 children. 2 of her daughters attended Madame de Maintenon's boarding school for girls. They were called Petites Filles du Roi, granddaughters of the king. Louise died of smallpox at the age of 42. Want even more tea on history? Check out the History Tea Time podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other royal history videos. If you really want to help, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A link is in the description. Thank you for watching.